Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet podcast. I am your host and resident fanalist, as always, Ryan Schlip. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_daddy. Okie dokie. First things first, a little, I guess, correction. I don't know. It's a weird situation. So yesterday we went over the final players of the top 30. We mentioned one of them. We don't know who it is, whatever, but kind of a weird thing popped up. Tom Silverstein said, just an FYI, for those who have been following the Packers' top 30 visits, Middle Tennessee State safety Juwan Gaston did not visit. Sorry for the mistake. I have corrected it on my list. Now, why is it weird? It's not that weird. I mean, it was just a simple mistake. Well, it's weird because Easton Butler showed a screenshot of Juwan Gaston sending Easton Butler a message telling him the Packers hosted me today. Beyond that, JJ Leahy posted a comment saying weird because he posted at least twice that he did. It looks like, I'm not sure if this is Instagram or what it is, but either way, I don't know if he retweeted it or he posted it or whatever the case may be. It says, Packers host Middle Tennessee safety Juwan Gaston on official pre-draft visit. And he puts cheese, and prayer hands on it. Essentially endorsing, yes, this did happen. So, really odd situation why. And you know, it's a question of, well, maybe Tom Silverstein, whatever. He responded to this and said, trust me on this one, he did not visit. I'm not sure if it was a hoax or why he posted Packers stuff, but he did not visit. So it's one of those things where it's like, all right, what are all the possible scenarios here? The one that I think makes the most sense, not that it makes sense, but it makes the most sense as far as my mind can come up with, on the fly here, would be that the Packers met with Gaston in some capacity that is not a top 30 visit. Maybe they hosted him in his own city or something like that, or had some kind of a meeting somewhere, but not like him coming back to Green Bay. I don't know what kind of weird rules and technicalities there are on, could he come to Green Bay but not go to the stadium and they take him out to dinner? And that technically doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know exactly how that all works. Another possibility that has crossed my mind as a real possibility, but, an odd one. Gaston is not a very popular guy. He's not really seen as a guy that's probably going to get drafted. As I mentioned, if you look over at the NFL mock draft database, they have 731 prospects, and he is not one of them. So what could this possibly be? Maybe he's just lying, him or his agent or whoever. Maybe they're just lying, saying, hey, the Packers wanted to come see me or whatever the case may be, to try to drum up interest to make it seem like he's a wanted commodity. That actually may go to the top of my list, to be honest with you. I hate to be cynical about the guy, but, you get desperate. I mean, this is his shot to get to the NFL. What wouldn't you do? You wouldn't reach out and be like, oh, yeah, Packers want to talk to me, bro. And then people start like, who's that? Other teams maybe start looking. They start, who's this Gaston guy? You know what I mean? While the Packers at the same time are like, whoa. We are not going to be put at 31 and get in trouble with the NFL because this guy's talking crap. So I'm sure they had to call the NFL and they're maybe reaching out to Silverstein like, I don't know what you're talking about, bro, but that dude never came here. The only other thing I can think of is they did officially meet with him and they wanted it, like the other guy, to be kept quiet. That one seems a little bit more unlikely because, the team is going well out of its way, and not that they've publicly said anything, but they're going well out of their way to say they did not meet with him. And that could very easily be verified by him if it ever got to that point. Imagine if he ended up being a Packer and they asked him about it and he's like, yeah, I was here. I don't know. That one just seems a little dicey to me. And we'll certainly find out because as far as I know, we're at 29 now, so we don't have the full 30. So if somebody else comes, and obviously they're very adamant that Gaston was not here. So, anywho, feel free to come to your own conclusions on that one, but a really weird, like I said, I didn't know of any situations where the Packers got real secretive about players, like with the quarterback. And now we have this with fake reports from players. Hey, man, just want to let you know, Packers, they hosted me. That might have been, honestly, where Silverstein got it from, too. If he's going around messaging, quote-unquote, insiders, you know what I mean? He's trying to find. Easton Butler is directly asked, like, hey, you know, if you're meeting with the team or if you're this or whatever, just message me. So guys actually do end up messaging him and telling him stuff. So it's possible, again, that he's going around to different teams and trying to reach out to beat writers or whatever to send out this info. Like, yeah, they were interested in me. If we find one other team where this happened, then I think we have our answer. Some other relatively interesting news, and let me see if I was stupid and went ahead and closed this tab. I wasn't supposed to. All right, this is 3 minutes, which seems a little excessive, but let's go ahead and I want to play this because I have a couple things to talk about with both of these, I guess.
Let's talk about a couple of injuries impacting this year's draft and an injury that impacted LSU quarterback Garrett Nussmeier throughout last season. The team at the time described it as an abdominal strain. It impacted everything about Nussmeier. He could not throw the football normally. My understanding is at the combine, he underwent scans that showed a cyst on his spine. That was pressing on a nerve and causing that pain in his oblique that really derailed his season. He's now under the care of a top spinal surgeon. He has been asymptomatic since January. If he needed to have surgery somewhere down the line, it's a minimally invasive procedure that just takes 2 or 3 weeks for the stitches to fully heal. Either way, the NFL Combine spine specialist sent a note to teams today saying there is no short or long-term risk with Garrett Nussmeier. The question now becomes, how high does Nussmeier go in this draft? He was viewed as a top prospect prior to last season. Does somebody go back to that 2024 tape and say, we still think this guy could be a QB1? I would anticipate he goes in the mid-rounds, probably somewhere around round 4. As for another injury...
Okay, before we get to the second injury, which is both of these are interesting, at this point, my absolute best guess of who that secret quarterback is Nussmeier. This is very Aaron Rodgers-esque, sort of a run and go get some tape last minute. He mentioned that the spinal specialist sent out this letter telling him all this stuff. It would not surprise me at all because a lot of teams are going to go, oh, wait a minute. This is a whole new deal here because he was a very, very top prospect. This was a guy that, you know, and this is why I always say when they say next year is going to be a strong class, don't really believe it. He was going to be a top, possibly number one pick in the draft. He fell. A lot of guys fell. That's what happens. But the issue, a lot of it had to do with, you know, he didn't look as good and he had this injury and all this stuff. If the report now is 2025 was fake, he has this injury, minimally invasive, very simple, we'll fix it, he'll be fine. And then you get the 2024 version of this guy that people thought might be the number 1 overall pick. Yeah, it would make sense that the Packers would be like, you know what, let's get another look at this guy. If he falls to us in the 3rd round or 4th round, we got to see if there's something special here. So, and again, with the secrecy, it would kind of make sense because it's, you know, probably a lot of teams are thinking, you know, let's be really quiet about going and checking this guy out. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if the secret quarterback that visited the Packers was Nussmeier. Continuing.
We're going to be monitoring closely Tennessee cornerback Jermod McCoy, who did not play at all last season, has certainly drawn a lot of scrutiny from the NFL medical people in the pre-draft process. And there is a possibility that he is going to slip in this draft because of the knee that kept him out last season. Let's talk about what this is and what it is not. It's not the ACL that he had reconstructed. My understanding is the ACL itself is fine. All the scans look good. The concern is about a bone plug that was used to repair a cartilage defect in his knee. Some of the doctors that have seen his scans are concerned that he will need another surgery to replace that bone plug, which would be an extensive recovery. We know this, Ian. McCoy feels good. He certainly looked it, ran really well at his pro day. In his mind, he is fully anticipating being ready to roll in the 2026 season. But you got 32 team doctors, 32 degrees of risk tolerance. Everybody is looking at this. This is a top 10 talent who potentially may not go that high, may not even go in round one.
If there was no knee injury, no doubt that McCoy would be discussed among Mansour Delane potentially as CB1, which whoever drafts him is going to get an incredibly talented player. And if some of this sounds familiar, some of the same conversation we're having about McCoy is the same conversation we had about Will Johnson last year, is the same conversation that was going on about Miles Jack several years ago with the Jacksonville Jaguars, who, by the way, played like 8 seasons, had an excellent career. Will Johnson battled some different injuries, but obviously off to a very good start on the field. It's not a discussion, Rhett, of is he going to play next year? Is he going to be okay? Teams are unanimous. He is going to be fine. It's just about long-term, which is why when Tom mentions him slipping, it's like, how many contracts is he going to be able to play? These are among the questions, but no doubt a very, very talented player.
So not really hard to figure out what the discussion point is here. When they talk about he could possibly slip out of the first round, you know, I'm not of the opinion the Packers move up super high because the draft capital would just be shocking. For example, the Seahawks have made it very clear they want out of that pick 32 spot. They want to try to trade back because they only have 4 picks and they want to accumulate more. The Packers would have to spend the earth, moon, and the stars to get that, it would probably cost next year's second round pick, if that's even enough, I don't know. But the Seahawks don't want next year's pick. They want this year's picks. They only have 4 picks this year. So anyways, that's pretty much out of the question. But the point is, there is a question of, let's say he does make it into the second round, the Packers have to start asking a question, assuming he's not just off their board, which he may be. But for everybody that he isn't off the board, there's a question of, at what point do we have to pull the trigger? At what point do we have to say, he's gone far enough, I can't let it go another pick here, we got to move up. Now, there's a secondary question of, do you want to be the team that drafts the guy that's a top 10 talent that was allowed to fall out of the first round entirely? Obviously, that's a pretty serious indictment from the rest of the NFL to say no thank you. The final interesting point on that, though, is that Will Johnson, who they're talking about, very talented cornerback, serious injury problems, and he ended up, another guy that was a premier talent that ended up falling out of the first round. Who drafted him? The Arizona Cardinals did. Now, that's not Gutekunst, which is the ultimate decider on these things. But as far as the defensive coordinator is concerned, Gannon was the guy that wanted him, and they ended up pulling the trigger to put him on Gannon's defense. So, not that they're the exact same thing, but it is at least worth noting that it was Gannon and that team that decided we are going to be the ones to pull the trigger on this guy and give him an opportunity because he's that good. And my guess is he probably doesn't fall out of the first. Based on what they were describing, doesn't sound terrible. It's just a little bit of patience that's required. I mean, he had an ACL injury. It sounds like his ACL is fine. They have to go in and replace something that was put in there, whatever. So what, he misses a few weeks and then you get the top, there has to be further concern beyond that, I would think. But anyways, if he does end up falling out of the first round, and this is where if we end up doing a live stream, which I'm as it gets closer, I'm getting more excited. I'm thinking about doing day 1, but let's assume we're doing a live stream on day 2. That is going to be the top topic of the day. Is going to be, do you pull the trigger? Where does he go, and at what point, and what are you willing to give up to go get him, if you are? So, okie dokie. Brian Gutekunst did speak to the media today, so why don't we take a break? We'll come back and dig into what he had to say. We'll be right back. All right, let's talk a little bit about this Brian Gutekunst press conference here. Talked about how it's going to be kind of a long, arduous day 1. They are going to be in the building, which makes sense. I think what's kind of funny about it, to be honest, is the fact that they had contemplated not showing up which really just goes to show how really unlikely, borderline like 0% chance that we trade into the first round. His whole demeanor about that question was essentially like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think we ultimately decided. I think we'll just do the usual stuff. We'll show up and everything. The picture of them, working the phones and trying to get into the first round, I don't think so. They're going to kick back, have a couple beers, and watch the draft together. He made a pretty interesting comment. We've talked a lot about best player available and the fact that it ends up kind of being a non-factor anyway because of the way that these boards are constructed. But he also made another comment. He said he's strongly committed to best player available. However, he believes that positional need is subconsciously baked into the board. So that's another, first of all, kind of shocked that he admitted that. But the fact that you have tiers to begin with so that when your pick comes, you've got however many guys to select from, and you're probably going to select at that point based on need. But the fact that the board is already kind of skewed toward need, it really just kind of demonstrates why, despite the fact that, we hear about best player available, best player available, best player available. Every time you look at a draft class, it really closely mirrors a team's needs. It's why we go through the mock drafts, and in the first round, it is exclusively needs. In fact, it's almost exclusively the number one need for a team almost every time. And then when you do a mock draft, people start screaming, well, they don't need that. Why would they pick that? Why do people even say that? Yes, it could be because they're stupid, but at the same time, we're able to accurately estimate how the first round goes pretty much anyways. Way different than what it would look like if it was random, right? How many realistic positions are we talking about, not including punter, kicker, long snapper? There's quite a few. Quarterback, guard, center, tackle, tight end, wide receiver, double it, call it 12 positions. So there's a 1 in 12 chance of any one position. What are the odds that it's always one of the top two needs all the time? Well, there's another reason why. And honestly, that one's a little bit worse. It's you can have two things at once when you build it into the tier structure in which nothing really wrong is happening. This is kind of explicitly saying something is wrong. Bias is skewing our board. I mean, we know that that's a thing, obviously, but to take already massively, let's put it this way, massively imperfect science, and then you have massively imperfect people doing a massively imperfect science, you already have some bias built in, and now you have a GM saying, yeah, well, positional bias is probably going to be a part of the process. Well, that's not good. Gives me even less hope in our draft board than what it already would have been. Says what he pretty much always says, team is good enough to play tomorrow, which is true. Of course it's true. Does not feel pressure to target immediate impact players. Again, this is the best player available thing, and that is going to be an important element because although usually, whether it's through that bias or through the tier system or whatever, that you end up being able to select somebody that you like at a position that you want to satisfy, there are moments where you're in a tough spot where you're going to have to decide, do I stick to the plan? Do I stick to the formula? Or do I deviate and do something I shouldn't? And honestly, that's kind of more, I think, what we're talking about when we say best player available. We think more about the rule as opposed to the exception. We think about every pick comes down to it has to be the guy at the top of the board. And that's not true. It has to be completely devoid of position. Well, that's kind of true, but not really based on XYZ. What it really comes down to is how much can you stick to your guns when something comes up that makes you uncomfortable. For example, drafting Jordan Love when we had Aaron Rodgers. Can you stick to your guns and do what the process says in that situation? Or are you going to do what's most expedient, what feels the best in the moment? And so, yes, when Brian Gutekunst says he feels no pressure to target, of course he doesn't. Of course, the guy that drafted frickin' Jordan Love feels no pressure ever. He was asked a little bit about subterfuge. He said they don't do that as much as they used to, but he says they don't really need to operate that way largely because of how tight their board is. In other words, it's a very tight-lipped organization. They do a very good job of keeping everything secret. They don't need to worry as much about throwing people off their scent. He is open. Some of these questions annoy me. He's open to moving up if the right player is there. Freaking duh, man. I mean, I don't understand. Like, if the right player is there, would you be open to moving up? Is there a single person on planet Earth that thinks the answer to that question is no? Now, he did talk about when somebody asked him about Schneider in Seattle and how they want to trade back, and he talked about how, I think he's got like 4 or 5 picks or something, so he wants to accumulate more picks, so that makes sense. And then he goes on to say, we've got 8 picks, and I want to accumulate more picks. So doesn't mean they're going to do it, but if the opportunity arises, he absolutely would like to get more picks. So if you're asking me, is he more likely to trade up or trade back, it's trade back. If he had 11 or 12 like he usually does, probably more so trade up. Not that either would be impossible. I'm just saying. Asked about the quarterback room, he gave a very generic answer that he wants to add to the QB room every year. We kind of know that. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but more than likely, whether it's in the draft or UDFA, it's almost assuredly going to be somebody. I don't want to read too much into that, as they're definitely drafting somebody. But it's a decent chance they draft somebody. If they don't, there's a very, 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 very good chance probably a handful of UDFAs will be getting picked up. He did talk about the whole NIL thing, and we've been kind of having the same conversation now for several years, but well, first of all, there's the COVID situation, which there was the extra year of eligibility, and then with NIL on top of it, people wanted to return, and so you had these drafts in which people were staying instead of coming out, which created really light drafts. But once you get to the end of that COVID window, which I'm guessing is by next year, I would have to assume, you're now going to have regular-sized drafts again. Everything will have caught up. The big difference here, though, is that you're finding older players because people are still returning. They're just, things have kind of shifted a little bit to where you've got older, especially in the mid to late rounds, and that probably isn't going to change as long as guys are able to go back and get more money. Because you got to figure, if you're a first-round pick, you probably want to come out and go into the draft. If you're a second-round pick, maybe you want to come out and go to the draft. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh round, why? Because some of these guys are superstars at their schools. They can make millions in college and still, I'll delay it a year to go to the NFL. But, I mean, I might flop out in the NFL. I need to stay here. And honestly, if it was my kid, that's what I would tell him to do. This is you don't know what's going to happen. And $1 single million could change your life forever. If a college is offering you if you have a $3 million offer on the table, you take it. You never walk away from $3 million to go maybe be a 6th round pick, but also possibly be a UDFA, because you never know what could happen. And also, even if you are drafted, it's going to be significantly less money, right? I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands per year. I mean, it'll be millions. Depending on where you're drafted, it'll be millions over the course of multiple years, or $1 million or something, I don't know. But who's to say you make a team? Who's to say you don't get cut that first year? Who's to say you don't have some kind of an injury? So it absolutely, I think, makes the most sense. I mean, this whole bet on yourself thing, look, on some level, you just have to be smart. Take the life-changing money, stash it away in an account that earns interest, then go into the NFL. Never look at that money until you're out of the NFL. But, at the end of the day, again, it is a shifting landscape. It is what it is. As long as we're all on a level playing field here as far as like older players, in other words, instead of an average of 22, it's 23, 24 now or something. It's not necessarily great, but it doesn't necessarily put you at a disadvantage either. The biggest disadvantage would be if there's a bunch of 22-year-olds to pick from and you take the 25-year-old because it's probably fine. That's where you set yourself behind. But if the new low is 22 and a half, 23, well, all right, then that's just what it is. It does put a little bit of a premium, and I did that when I did the mock draft. I was going through, and there's quite a few older players in those mid-rounds, but you find a 22-year-old with some decent grades and whatnot. It's like, I think we should just go with this guy. It is interesting to think, too, how that could change the philosophy of things. When you think about Devontae Wyatt, you know, he's coming up on needing a new contract at 28, 29 years old. Unfortunately for the players, it makes them much more recyclable. I mean, how many, like, 30-year-olds are we going to be giving first-time mega contracts to? You imagine if the top pass rusher, he's the new young stud or whatever, but he's 29. Are you going to give him a 4-year, $200 million or a 5-year, $250 million contract? The guy's 29. I don't know. Shifting landscape, different things to consider, I guess. It goes on to say NIL has helped expose which players love football as opposed to motivated by money. I mean, look, you can say that. That's fine. They're playing football for money in either case. It's hard to say they don't love football when they go back to playing football in college. I think that's kind of a cheap shot to throw at people to encourage them to run to the NFL, or we just think, or we'll end up thinking you don't actually love football. And just for the money is also a little bit of a cheap shot. It's not just about the money. There's two things here I have to balance. This is my entire life. What I do here, yes, I love football, but I'm only going to play football for a certain period of time, and what decisions I make are going to set up the rest of my entire life. I can't be flippant or stupid about this. So I know, you know, there are probably going to be NFL teams that want to discount these people and look up their nose or down their nose at them and say, oh, you just care about the money. Well, first of all, duh. You should do it for the love of the game. Okay, well, if somebody foregoes millions of dollars and then goes to the combine and tears their ACL and then doesn't get drafted and doesn't make a roster and makes very little money and then has to go work at Walmart, you know what they are? They're an idiot. If you love football, you can play football the rest of your life. You can play football till you're 60 years old with some of your buddies in the backyard. You can coach football. You can love football forever. I think it's important to not allow things that you love to overrule rational decisions, like don't run away from millions of dollars. Anywho, he did say he feels really good about the wide receiver room, which I am happy to hear. There's obviously been a lot of questions about that, and it doesn't necessarily mean beyond this year, but even besides that, it feels as though it's not a massive priority as far as draft and whatnot. Doesn't mean we won't take one in the second round. It doesn't mean any of that. It's just I don't think it's a top priority. But I think even more importantly is how they feel about the guys that they have and the fact that they kind of felt like they didn't really need Dobbs and Wicks at this point anymore, which is kind of how we all felt, especially with Matthew Golden. I shouldn't say all, but with Matthew Golden there, you're looking at it and going, I mean, dude, Golden, Reed, Watson, that's your core right there. And anything that's preventing that core is ruining things. But yeah, I just, I've said this before, but it feels like sometimes, we get to hear from them in the press conferences and that's cool. And we get to pick up a couple tidbits here and there. But I feel like sometimes they speak to us through their decisions and actions. And then when you stitch that together with what you hear in the press conferences, it kind of paints a picture for you. And, I mean, you'd have to be foolish to think that they aren't absolutely not even paving, they're bulldozing away from Matthew Golden here. There was a question, too, about, I know you guys don't like the whole number one thing or whatever. Matt LaFleur kind of threw a fit about that constant question. And it is somewhat of a silly question, but at the same time, I think you can take it too far in the other direction. And there is a question of maybe Matt LaFleur learned that lesson last year of, I don't have number ones, I have pieces. And these different pieces can be assembled in different ways to kind of work out my plans and my plays. And part of the problem with that is you have a bunch of guys that all want to be number one. And not only can only one guy be number one, but Matt LaFleur didn't even have number one. He had nobody was given the opportunity to be a number one. Nobody really got to be that dude. And then just in terms of offensive rhythm, which there was nothing wrong with the offense outside of injuries and whatnot, but there is still a question of, do you think maybe it could work better with a Devontae Adams type of guy as opposed to trying to spread it around all the time? Essentially, Gutekunst's answer was, there's benefits to both. Yes to all of that on one hand, but at the same time, if your offense runs through one guy and that guy gets hurt, you're screwed. Whereas now we have an offense that runs through two guys, and if those two guys, Watson and Tucker, get hurt, we're screwed. Hopefully Golden makes 3, but no offense to Reed, but I mean, he's a great player so long as we have the people that are able to make the machine go. He works well within the system, but the same thing happened with Randall Cobb when we had a bunch of injuries one year, and Randall Cobb had to be our number 1 wide receiver. It was awful. Randall Cobb's a great player, but he is not a number 1, and he can't carry an offense as a number 1. He needs the rest of the pieces to be operating. He's got to have those guys that are winning against man coverage to force them into zone so that he can operate. All right, let's take a break here, and we'll come back, get through the rest of this, and see where we're at. We'll be right back. All right, as for the offensive line, said he feels good about the starting 5 despite Zach coming off an injury. Again, I think we all kind of understand the situation. How much we're okay with it or like it or whatever, we all understand it. We have a starting 5 right now. That is the situation. I'm not a fan of that, but that is the situation. We all hope that they improve, which I think that they will. How much, I'm skeptical, but I think we expect them to improve. It's year 2 together. It's hopefully a healthy offensive line. As I said, Banks had his worst year ever, so even if he could just get back to his baseline bad as opposed to being awful, that's an improvement. Zach Tom being healthy is obviously better than not having Zach Tom. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, sometimes it's coach speak, and sometimes it's hard to tell if it's coach speak. I don't think it is. I think when Brian Gutekunst says they're very excited about their offensive line, I think he means it. I think he's very proud of the offensive line he's built. I think he's very happy with the assessment he's done. But there is probably a question of depth as well as development. And development is where it gets a little bit more interesting because, I think we know for the most part what we have this year. I think there's still a question about center right guard. And by that, I guess I mean there is a chance that there could be a legitimate competition given a talented enough player. Whereas if we draft a tackle, I think Morgan's the tackle. If we draft a guard, I don't think he takes the left guard spot. Nobody's taking Zach Tom's spot away from him. I don't think. However, I think it's at least possible that, especially Belton, because he just plays as poorly as he does, and Sean Ryan, I think he's also quite not good. All I really want is, like I said, a guy that's versatile, that can create that little triangular competition piece. I don't know if that would ever happen. I'm sure the Packers don't even agree with me on this sentiment, but it would be great to get a center guard prospect that can come in there and compete for guard and center. And then because he could possibly win the center spot, let Sean Ryan also compete for guard and center. And then you've got, 3 guys competing for the right guard spot, 3 guys competing for 2 guys competing for the center spot. And honestly, if I get my way, then Belton ends up being very good and he stays as our right guard and this new guy becomes our new center. But either way, when you start thinking long-term beyond this year, certainly Sean Ryan is a question mark. Certainly Belton is a question mark. Morgan becomes a question mark. And Banks becomes a question mark. Because if Banks has another bad year, I know they just pushed some money out, so I don't know exactly when we can get out, but they're going to be looking to get out as soon as possible, whether that's next year or the year after that. Sean Ryan, similar situation. Belton and Morgan are on trials here, and they're on rookie deals that are, Morgan especially, you're going into year 3 now. So if he has a bad year, now we've got 3 years with no production from him and a very serious question there. And if Belton has a bad year, then it's not looking great for him either. And you have to plan for that to some degree. You have to look at it and say, what if we don't have a tackle long-term, and we don't have a left guard long-term, and we don't have a center long-term, and we don't have a right guard long-term, and also we do have a right tackle that we like, but he's also having some injury stuff, and I don't know what version of him we're going to be getting anymore. So you have to address offensive line to some capacity. It's just a question of how do you weigh that against all your other needs. So all that to say, I think he genuinely does like the offensive line, but that doesn't mean it isn't to some degree a priority, maybe for different reasons. Depth, hedging, long-term vision, whatever. He also said he liked what Monk did late in the season. I don't know how serious that is, but he said it. He did say we're always looking to add O-line. Notes there's only so many big guys in the world that can play at a high level. So that is another position that you're always, at least the Packers are always taking some level of swings at. So you can, let's just say expect at least one, which I think everybody, there's probably not a lot of mock drafts out there with no offensive line picks. Looking at nose tackle, he did more or less confirm what we've been talking about the big nose tackle types. He was somebody asked about Hargrave, could he play nose tackle kind of thing, and he kind of, he did the thing he always did, which I'm glad he added the second part because then it's bull crap. He talked about Hargrave and said, yeah, you could tell right away by the way he answered it, where he was kind of like, yeah. Could he play that nose tackle role because he's done it in the past? Yeah, he probably could. But he added in number one that they would try to find somebody that's a little more tailor-made to that. Not necessarily that they would try to find it. I don't know the exact wording, but that this defense would require it maybe more so than Jeff Hafley is essentially what he said. But he went on to say that he believes that Hargrave and Wyatt could fill in that role if needed. That's how you know Hargrave's just a pass rusher. In terms of how they envision him. Oh, yeah, both of those guys could, but, yeah, blow it out your ear, bro. No frickin' way. He did go on to say that, Stackhouse, Ford, and those guys can do that job. I give that about a 50% on the BS meter. Number one, they always shout those guys out. They never want to say, we can't do it. They're always going to say, well, we have X, Y, and Z on the roster. How much they actually believe in those guys is a secondary thing. Now, remember, wait a minute. Let's just say we don't have any serious investment in that position. I was going to say we had no draft picks. They're all UDFAs, but Ford was a 7th-round pick. I forgot. I'm guessing they like Stackhouse. But you also have to remember, he flat out said Jeff Hafley didn't really need that in his system. So Stackhouse was, I hate to say afterthought, but yeah, you're fine grabbing a guy like that as a UDFA. So now what you're explicitly telling me is this new guy really requires that much more. And, we've already kind of addressed edge rusher. We have Micah Parsons and Lucas Van Ness. First-round picks, clearly, and then some. We've got Hargrave and Wyatt. Hargrave is a phenomenal football player. Wyatt, another first-round pick who has shown a lot of talent. What are we missing up there? And maybe it remains to be just some of this low-level kind of a thing or whatever, but I would guess they would like a higher level of investment than is currently on the roster. I think that's probably the best way I can say it. That doesn't mean second-round pick, but, the whole let's just not care and do 6, 7, 8, 6, 7 UDFA. I don't know about that. A couple notes on scouting evaluation and whatnot. Heavy emphasis on finding players who love football, competitiveness over compensation. Kind of already talked about that. And I also think that's probably a generic throwaway that all 32 teams want, but there's also some questions about culture and maybe having some issues with people over, specifically looking at Wicks and Dobbs potentially. I think with Dobbs, it's a little bit more proven, having some attitude issues about their position. And I don't know if it's necessarily just a pride thing. I think it's a paycheck thing. Dobbs is upset because he's not going to get a giant paycheck because he's not getting to be that number one guy or whatever. I don't know this, but I think they might be a little gun shy, even though I think it's probably a bit of a stupid evaluation. Not entirely, but I think you have to be a little bit more broad-minded about the situation. I mean, if they don't care about football and they're just chasing a paycheck wherever they go, that may be kind of an issue. But bottom line is, I think the Packers are just kind of they got bit by something, and this is the problem with this situation is you're always just running away from something, and you can't just keep running away from something, because if you address this thing, then you find all the guys that are super passionate. You're going to draft a bunch of guys that have different issues, right? Well, they can't just love money. Okay, best of luck. They have to love football. Okay, you can probably find those guys. They can't be small because then they get hurt. They can't be, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, you're always, and you can't do all of the things, so you have to prioritize. So, again, that's sort of the whole thing where you get what you emphasize, which is great because you get what you emphasize, but the problem is it's a zero-sum game when it comes to time. And so when you emphasize one thing, you de-emphasize everything else. And so those other issues pop up. So, I get it. This is the issue of the day, and they're going to try to rectify this specific issue. And I trust that they probably will, but I also believe that there will be additional issues. And so I think the priority needs to be just making sure you find really good players, because really good players can help you to build a really good team. And when you have a really good team, that's how you build a really good locker room. Primarily. You can have toxic people in good locker rooms and great people in bad locker rooms. But the easiest way to build a great locker room culture is to build a winning locker room, a winning culture. He said they work really hard to gather intel through relationships with people around the player, not just the players themselves, which, again, we kind of know about that already, talking to coaches and things. And the coaches do tend to want to tell the truth because you're going to be talking to these people again. The coaches also want to build relationships, and you burn bridges really fast with NFL personnel when you're lying about a guy with some bad character issues. So when they ask, you should probably tell the truth. And I think for the most part, they absolutely do. He said he defines draft success in the moment as acquiring players who fit the culture, which I hate that answer. That's such a Packers answer. And again, I get it, and I do know that it's important. I get that it's important. But for a fan base that wants to be good and win, I mean, it's on the list. I don't know if it's at the top of the list. Anyways, that's about it. Talked about Van Ness's fifth-year option, and basically, like, why hasn't it been done yet or what's going on? He basically just said, I haven't even talked to him yet. I haven't really seen he said he'd seen 4 players in the building so far. He hasn't hardly seen anybody yet. Everybody just kind of got in the building, so he wants an opportunity to talk with him. I don't know if that's good news, bad news, or just business as usual. You always have a sit down and talk with him about it. I don't know, but that was his answer. So the decision is due May 1st, so he didn't really feel the need to, make that a priority, I guess. But anywho, that's about it. I think that's all I got to say. We are really rapidly closing in. Any and all, again, any draft news as far as a stream, I will be sure to let you know. I don't have anything planned at this time. There will be something. I don't know what days. I don't know when. I don't know really any of that stuff. It'll be probably a little bit spur of the moment. I'm trying to build some stuff out to make it fun and entertaining. And I may last minute just be like, you know what? I really don't feel like doing it today, and I want to give myself that flexibility, especially day one. But again, if you're really wanting to do that, just turn on all the notifications. Listen to the podcast. I'll tell you on the podcast. I'll mention it on social media. I'll send out links. I'll do everything I can to get that information to you as far as where you go for that. But very, very excited. I'm obviously sad about day one, but happy we have Micah, and it's still going to be a lot of fun going through this draft process. I will talk to you tonight, tomorrow, whatever. Have a good one. Bye-bye.